It's March 7th, and though it's reasonably cold right now, it's going to warm up a lot later in the day. Perfect temperatures for sugaring. We tap about 5 maples, maybe one more, one less, depending on the year, and collect the sap and boil it down for our home use of maple syrup. And so this is one of the trees that we're going to be tapping. And the process for tapping first starts with finding a vertical line on the tree that doesn't have any old tap holes in it, because the old tap holes, like where that is, isn't going to have as good syrup because there's the scar in the tree from the old tap hole. And this is a sugar maple tree, and we only tap sugar maple trees. Then, after making sure, maybe taking a little bit of bark off, generally with the claw end of a hammer, if I can get that out of my pocket. Taking a little bit of bark off where you're going to drill the hole so it can have a clean hole, and so you can get the tap in there. And then you want to drill a hole slightly smaller than the diameter of your tap, which I have here. This is the tap I'm going to be using for this tree. Slightly smaller, at a kind of mostly in but a slightly upward angle. We use a brazen bit because we only tap 5 trees, but if you're doing much more, you're probably going to want to use an electric drill. And our electric drill doesn't fit the large bits that we have that fit the brazen bit. This takes a decent amount of time tapping a tree, and so you want to do it at the slight upward angle because it helps sap drain in, but you don't want to do it too much, because if you do it too much, then the hole will be too oval and the tap won't seal properly, and it will leak sap out of it, which you don't want, because you want all the sap going into your bucket, not down the side of the tree. And you want the hole to be 2 inches deep. Plus or minus a little bit's fine, but that's enough to really get in to where the sap runs in the tree. Even though the end result of this is maple syrup, it is called sugaring because when originally done, the end result was sugar. This sugar was produced for commercial sale, though it was also used by the families that produced it. It managed to maintain a competitive, though slightly higher, price with cane sugar. Abolitionists would often buy it as it was the only sugar produced without slave labor. The use of this product as a sugar comparable with white, cane sugar, is the source of the lighter grades being considered superior. The lighter grades, produced near the beginning of the season, have less maple flavor in them, and so were more desirable for producing clean, flavorless sugar, which was desired. Unlike today, the point of using maple products was not for their maple flavor. Even though the reason people now use maple syrup is for the flavor, the lighter grades are still considered superior. In addition to the historical connections and the time of collection, lighter grades show that the sugar maker is diligent, as letting sap sit around too much can result in darkening. At least that is the folklore I've heard. An important thing to note is that trees need to be of a certain size to tap and be healthy to the tree. They need to be at least 31 inches in circumference. Though we don't put multiple taps on a single tree, this can and almost always is done in commercial operations. At least 10 inches need to be maintained between each tap for this to be done and keep the tree healthy in the long term. Though the whole tree should not be tapped at 10-inch spacing. Once you have the hole drilled, it's time to pound in the tap. You want the hook on the tap vertical for the best bucket hanging. And you just kind of tap it in. You don't like really drive it in that hard. Just until the little flange on it meets up with the edge of the tree. Then hang the bucket. put on the lid to keep out any precipitation and limit the amount of little bits of stuff that fall into the bucket, and you're ready to be collecting sap. So it's March 26th, a really good day for sugaring. It got down to about 20 degrees last night and got up to around 50 degrees at the highest temperature of the day. Really, this should be a really great running day. To have a good sap run, it needs to be below freezing at night and above freezing during the day. And it's more subtle than just that temperature difference. It needs to be just like 1 or 2, it barely needs to get below freezing, but it needs to get a considerable amount above freezing to have a good sap run. You'll get some runs on days where maybe it gets up to 35, but to actually get any decent amount of sap, you'll want it to get up to at least 40 degrees. Whereas if it gets down to only 30 at night, it's really fine. Though, if you have, the higher the temperature at night, the shorter the season, because once it buds out, the trees bud out, then the sugaring season is over. So, this bucket here is on one of our trees, and you don't have to take the lid off, but there's a decent amount in this one. This isn't not one of our highest producing trees, and pouring it into a 5-gallon bucket to carry back to our house. Make sure to put the lid back on. In order to make maple syrup, you need to remove most of the water from the sap. The rule of thumb for this is that to get 1 gallon of syrup, you need to start with 40 gallons of sap. We boil off the sap, as would anyone operating at a home scale. We do this both on our wood cook stove inside and on a small wood stove outside that we can lay a pan directly over the fire. The reason we use the outside stove is if we use the inside stove to boil off all the water, it would both heat up our house too much and get too much water in the house, which would then condense everywhere. Once most of the water is boiled off, we generally try to do the finishing inside as we have more control. Though we may use a thermometer or check with a syrup hydrometer, mostly we rely on experience as to when to take it off the fire and can it. If we let it go a bit too far, we can always add some sap to it. Pour it into sanitized jars while still hot so it will self-seal. It does not need a boiling water bath as it has already been boiled and has such a high sugar content. Also in the sugar is niter. These minerals sink to the bottom of the syrup and are considered undesirable. Commercial producers filter it out, but we just leave it in the jars. If we don't want to eat it, it is at the bottom of the jar so we can avoid it. It's April 12th, and even though it's below freezing right now and was below freezing for most of the day yesterday, I'm still taking down the bucket. And even though this is still producing a little bit, this is our last tree also. We're taking it down because we boiled up, the last time we boiled up was yesterday, and we've made almost 1.75 gallons, but we're done. And also, this one had the top blew off, so it has a lot of ice in it that from the snow that fell yesterday. And this will still continue to produce, but it's just not worth it to have only one tree producing just a little bit for a couple more days. And so I tapped this tree on camera, but it didn't start running well right away. It took a while to start running, but it's still running now. And that's the pattern we've seen with these trees, with them running really well either at the start or the end of the season. Like if you have a tree that runs well at the beginning of the season, it stops early. We had one tree which we took the bucket down about 2 weeks ago because it basically stopped running effectively. And this one probably took a week or so to get started after tapping, more than just a little bit. And that seems to depend on a lot of factors. Kind of part of it is the southern exposure, part of it's the age, part of it just the amount of snow in the area around the tree. This one had snow near it for a while. not the oldest tree we have, but one on the older side. And it doesn't have great southern exposure, though it does have some western exposure. Um, so that's why, and it also seems to be kind of random. Some trees like to go early, some trees like to go late. And this is on the western side of the tree, and I think the eastern sides like to run a bit earlier. I don't know. It's all a little bit, who knows. But I mentioned that we made almost 1.75 gallons, and that's really good for us. And this was also a season that was over a month long, so it was a pretty long season. And though I think there's some relation between the two of those, it's not like a long season equals a good season. You can have bad long seasons and really good short seasons. It just depends on exactly how the temperatures work. Like if you get some really hot days, that might mean the season's short, but you're going to get a lot of sap during those days. Whereas if it's just like long and barely getting up, like the snow melts and then eventually gets really warm quickly, and then the trees start to bud out a little bit, and the running sap stops. It actually stops a little bit before they bud out, but that's just what's often given. So you can grab a tool for this, but we often just use the bucket because it's just when we're out, we notice that it's needs to be taken down. We put this maple syrup on pancakes along with other stuff often, as well as we often put it in yogurt to give it a nice sweeten. In plain yogurt, you really can get the taste of maple syrup. Which is a very nice thing. And this is how we end up basically using up all the maple syrup we make in a year, is just through using it little bits and pieces every so often. We don't really cook or bake with it, use it as a sweetener because it's kind of such a valuable thing for us. And you really have to put a lot of maple syrup in baking products to get any of the maple flavor through. While we just run a home system that makes about the amount of syrup we use in a year, we have neighbors that ran a sugaring operation at a commercial scale. They collected sap both from buckets and from pipelines which gravity feed into tanks. These would be emptied into their sap trailer, pulled behind a tractor, which they would then empty, via a gravity feed, into large tanks which can store a backlog of sap. Their whole system is based on gravity, other than the parts that require sap to be hauled and, later, syrup be carried around the sugar house. This is different to many modern systems which will use vacuum pumps, which both allow sap lines to not need to be strung with as much of a constant downhill gradient and extract more sap from the trees. Additionally, many modern systems use pumps to move sap around the sugar house. My neighbors also never used reverse osmosis, which takes a significant percentage of water out before boiling, preferring to produce maple sap the traditional way, boiling off all the water. This was probably an economic decision at the scale they are operating at, and they didn't want to buy an expensive reverse osmosis machine. Once enough sap has been collected, the arch is fired up and boiling begins. The fire would get so hot that a leather apron, shoulder-length gloves, and a face shield was needed to feed the logs into it. General practice is to use the junk softwood logs you cut in a year for sugaring, while you save the hardwood for burning in the house and the nice softwood logs for milling. They have a second arch which, though the injectors have been recently removed, was set up to use oil. This was a popular method for a decade or two before the 70s oil crisis hit, where it became uneconomical. The equipment is not out, as they have not sugared in a couple years, but a gravity feed from the storage tanks is controlled by a float valve, which lets in more sap as needed. After a fine screening, it enters the labyrinth that is the boiling pans. After winding its way through both pans, most of the water is boiled off, and it is ready to take off as syrup. In this last area, the syrup can get quite frothy, and a bit of butter, or any other fat, can be used to calm it down so it does not boil over. Once the syrup is ready, which our neighbors determined by seeing how it was sheeting off the skimmer and the temperature and checking with the hydrometer, they would take the amount that had become syrup and bring it over to the niter filters. Poured through these filters while still hot, once out the other side it would be placed in the bottles for sale. The hot syrup seals itself in the bottles. Generally, once every time it is taken off, a sample would be placed in a small container and compared against reference samples to determine its grade, which would then be marked on the container by affixing the appropriate sticker on the top.